Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
Right. Welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 96 of our devoted series. We continue to make our way through the entire Bible and start a new book today, the book of First Kings. I am excited to be back and joined by my wife, Victoria, as we pick up here in the book of First Kings. I didn't even count before we started how many books we have now completed at this point.
Yeah.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel. 10 books. 10 books down. So praise the Lord. We are on book 11. Only 15% of the way through book wise, but pages wise, we've got a lot more because there's some shorter books throughout there that we'll get through. So we pick up here in First Kings, pick up kind of where King David is left off. So the end of First Samuel or Second Samuel, I should say, King David has just kind of got caught up in the sin with a census and kind of doing a count and whatnot. And then we jump here into First Kings, and we're kind of in David's last days officially, right? And so there's in these couple chapters here, chapter 1 and chapter 2, there's kind of establishing who will be king next and kind of some drama with that, things of that nature that we'll just kind of cover here. But this is going to be pretty much our last time seeing King David in history. We'll repeat his history later on in scripture, and then we'll hear from him in Psalms later on. So we're not done with David quite yet.
At all.
But talk to me about how First Kings chapter 1 starts, as it really just begins with who's going to be king next, essentially. What jumps out to you here in chapter 1?
Yeah, I mean, he's old. He needs this young girl now to keep him warm and stuff. I wonder, have you ever wondered what these people look like when they say she's the most beautiful in all the land, or he's the most handsome in all the land? I wish I knew what their beauty looked like, right? In their day, their time, their standards, what was beautiful. Because like I said, we're humans, things change, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I wondered that, but that's neither here and there until later on it gets somebody killed. But Adonijah was wild and trying to get her as his own wife. But in the meantime, I do think it was interesting though. Once again, we have a moment where Adonijah is claiming and exalting himself, saying that he'll be king, right? And David does nothing, right? It's another instance where, his sons is violent. This reminds me of Eli, right? His sons is violent, and you're not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And so, here we go. Verse 6, it says, his father, meaning David, had never at any time displeased him by asking, why have you done this himself? And so I just think it was really interesting that I don't know, he's just letting them do these things without, maybe because he's old and he's tired and he doesn't really have much control over what's happening sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I also wonder if there's a difference between kind of a lot of these sins are just against David, not necessarily against God, right? Whereas, you kind of compared it to Eli's sons. Eli's sons were much more offending God by their
for
actions,
sure.
right? Whereas this is just about this earthly kingdom piece. But yeah, he definitely was hesitant to, I mean, really step in at any point for his sons and their actions throughout all of this. So yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. But yeah, he definitely doesn't get in his way. And it really takes Nathan essentially to step in and go, yeah, Adonijah can't be king. That's not a good plan. That's not going to work. And so he goes to Bathsheba and they come up with kind of this this plan of how to make sure that Solomon will ultimately be king next, right?
Yeah, it's just like he definitely can't become king in their eyes, right? Like in terms of like God fearing people, because here in verse 9 he's sacrificing sheep and cattle by the serpent stone. And it's like, okay, he's already dabbling in like pagan stuff here. Like his heart's not for God. And I think Nathan's like, yeah, nah, his heart is not for God. Like he can't be the one. And the thing is interesting, like he said, he didn't invite Nathan the prophet. First of all, he's like, I don't need no prophets up in here, no prophets of the Lord at least.
Yeah.
And then well, at least not any good ones. And then Benaiah, which is the bodyguard, so like those who are closest to David, right? Like the warriors who are actually closest to him, or Solomon, right? Like he's scheming.
Yeah, it seemed clear that like he had no intention of like continuing his father's legacy, right? Because he's not even inviting the people closest to his father that would help to carry that out.
Yeah.
Specifically. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, Nathan interferes and he goes to Bathsheba and kind of says, this is the plan, is to go before the king and say these things, right? And kind of make it clear that like Solomon needs to be confirmed as king before David passes, because we don't have much time. David's getting old. He about to die. If he doesn't do this, it's going to be an issue, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, like kind of just going through chapter 1 here, like David does just that. Like he hears Bathsheba, he's like, what you say will be so, Solomon will be king. And so they do. They confirm him as king, march him off on the mule or whatever it is, with, and kind of parade him through the town. And everybody's like, all right, Solomon's the new king. And Adonijah's like, oh son, my brother's the king and he gonna come after me and kill me. It kind of runs to hide essentially there. But yeah, what were some other things that jumped out to you here in chapter 1 as that story plays out?
Yeah, I think it's again one of those things where, like I was mentioning a couple of days ago, where like we see now that Joab, who's not in David's favor, as we know clearly by now, and then Abiathar, who we thought was loyal to him because he was loyal when Absalom was trying to rebel. Like those two people are really close to Adonijah right now in like supporting him. And I just think it's interesting that, like you said, there's a right way to do things and there's like the deceitful way to do things. And so here we see that the way that Adonijah is trying to go about this is really deceitful. And even like you said, like how he is having this whole like private party, but when David shows up and establishes Solomon in the way that he goes about establishing him, it does show that, like, okay, this is the right way to do it. And everybody acknowledges that because, like, clearly there was no questioning.
Yeah.
Like, once he got put on the king's mule, once he sat on the king's throne, like, all of that, and they saw people like the royal bodyguard and Nathan the prophet, with him, like they could see clearly this was the right way to do things.
Yeah, I mean, because I think like ultimately they were going about it the way that they were because they knew they didn't have the king's blessing, right?
Absolutely.
Like they were trying to intentionally work around the system because the system wasn't working in their favor. Like the system wasn't going to support what they were trying to do. So it was almost like if we can get in and become king before they declare king, then that's going to count. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, it's not even like you said, they intentionally did the wrong way because that was the only path for them to get what they ultimately wanted out of this. But
then when David steps in and here we see again the horn of oil, kind of like we see like the anointing of kings. So that's been the tradition, right? That like from Saul to David, now Solomon, there is a priest that comes with oil and anoints, right?
Yeah.
And declares it. So we see that, and we see like, you know, the blowing of the trumpet and, you know, these different things that, like I said, when you're in compliance and you're doing the right things and this is actually led by the king, like these things are going to happen the right way.
Yeah, it's good. Well, like I said, he hears of it, he goes and hides, he puts his hand on the horns of the ark, and pretty much just says like, look, until I know that Solomon's not going to kill me, I'm not leaving, kind of from this space and this place. And so, yeah, because like he kind of gets this word, Solomon's already taken the throne. Like, you know, it's over. You've lost. You know, we are now calling the country of Judah for King Solomon.
Exactly.
We can, you know, report that the polls are in. Yeah. Anything that you thought was interesting in that regard is he kind of ran away fearful before we get to chapter 2.
In this verse 52, I love when he says, but if wickedness is found in him, he shall die. And I feel like he already just like calls it out. That like, yeah, there's an evil in you, which he knows there is, right? Like, you'll die. So eventually you're going to do something that's going to get yourself killed.
Yeah. Right? Like he's like, look, I can't make any promises that he just won't die at all. I can promise you I'm not going to just kill you just because you want to be king.
Right.
However,
one
wrong move.
Like, and it's a wrap.
Yeah, just know you are not immune. Should you choose to do that. So, which is said, we will see that happens here in chapter 2. So, in Moses chapter 2, he is king, and so David, man, he has these words that he kind of gives to him here at the beginning of chapter 2. What you find was interesting and kind of what he says to Solomon.
I love this part. I don't know why I love this passage so much. Did you like it?
Well, yeah, but it kind of goes back a ways for me, particularly chapter 2, verse 2. Okay. Yeah, just like that. Be strong and be a man.
Yeah, show yourself a man, and somebody says it.
Yeah, show yourself a man. It was a theme for men something way back in the day. And then another one that I actually ended up using for another men's thing at a different church. And so, yeah, that show yourself a man is like,
that's rich.
Yeah, it's a passage that has always stuck with me just from as a kid or as a young man, you know, and that's like his charge to his son, man. Like, yeah, be a man. Like, I don't know, I don't see that often in scripture. That's kind of the like charge. It's like be a man, like not a man of God, just be a man, like be who you are supposed to be, live up to the standard in that way. So yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I love the conjunction of like show yourself a man and keep charge of the Lord your God, right?
And obey the Lord.
And obey the Lord and walk in his ways. And like, I just, in today's era, you just don't see that much. Where like, be a man, but make sure you're walking in the ways of the Lord. That you can be a man and walk in the ways of the Lord, right? And like, and follow him and follow his rules and be close to him. And so I do love that. And it's one of the things I love about you, you know?
Oh.
So we married, babe. You know, it's like, oh, yeah, man who loves the Lord. Come on with it.
Praise God.
Yes.
Lord is kind.
But yeah, so I think, once again, I just think it's funny that that he goes through this whole like, get him, don't let him live. Like Joab, you know how he did me. You know how he dealt with those other people. Don't let his head go down to Sheol, like in peace.
Yeah.
He was serious about that.
Yeah, it seems as interesting. It's very like practical. His commands, like when I think about like Israel's last words or Moses' last words or like some of these others, it's just like these blessings. It's kind of big picture vision, like to the whole people of Israel. Like because this is more personal, it's like 1-to-1. I feel like it's really like father to son. Like first of all, be a man, keep the commands. If you do that, God's already promised me that like we'll be straight as far as my throne, forever, right?
Yeah.
So just do your part, keep it going. You know what I'm saying? You do that, and real quick. There's a couple things I couldn't take care of before I went.
Right.
Like, let me here's some wisdom, all right? This guy, look out for him.
Yeah, don't trust him.
Don't trust him. This guy, he's good people, man. Show kindness to him.
Yeah.
He'll be straight. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This cat, don't forget what he did to me,
Yeah.
And like,
make him pay.
Yeah, I just love that. It's just
I said that I wouldn't do nothing to him, but you can. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love in like verse 9 though. He said, "For you are a wise man," and he says this to Solomon before Solomon gets wisdom from the Lord, like divine wisdom from the Lord. And so I think that's very interesting. Because again, that like David does still have discernment, right, and insight, and like to see that in Solomon, like there is this wisdom, right, in him already.
Yeah, I think, it's all really good, and again, as a father of going on 4 boys now, like I read this, just go like, this is one day I'm gonna sit down with my boys like this too, right? And just kind of say, here's some wisdom, what I've experienced in life, right? Solomon does the same thing. That's where we get most of Proverbs from, right? It starts with Proverbs 1, like, my son, listen. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Here's my wisdom, my advice, right? And I just love that kind of play out there, but yeah, Adonijah's not quite as wise as Solomon is, and yeah, man, he makes this this request to Bathsheba, and yeah, it just does not play out well in his favor. He wants this Shunammite as his wife, and Bathsheba just knows that it's just a plot, and a scheme, and Solomon is just like, well, I already told you if you do something evil, what's gonna happen here. So what I would kind of I guess and give it away, he dies, right? You guys read it. What do you think was interesting here in chapter 2?
I think it's so funny that Adonijah really tried to, first of all, slide around to Bathsheba and then go to Solomon himself, right? And then had the nerve to say, now the throne was supposed to be mine, right? Like, what? Yeah, what? He said, you got some nerve to come and talk about, I'm supposed to be king.
To Solomon's mama, though.
To Solomon's mama.
Like, this is his mama.
Well, I was supposed to be king anyways. So, but it wasn't, what he said, let me quote the Bible correctly. The kingdom was mine, and that all Israel fully expected me to reign. However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And I'm just like, well, if it was his from the Lord, then let it be. It was never supposed to be yours, right? But it is. This is this wickedness. This is the wickedness that Solomon was talking about here. That you trying to be, sly, and it was supposed to be mine, and so can I just have Abishag the Shunammite as my wife? And I honestly I wasn't expecting off with his head, but Solomon was not playing. Like, he was like, yeah, I'm about to nip this in the butt. Like,
yeah.
I'm not playing that with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was interesting about Bathsheba. Also, like, asked, I don't know. I thought maybe she would have just, like, known and chose not to.
Yeah, but like, no.
Yeah, she takes it to him. But, you know, it's probably part of the plan. Because if she had not, then, you know, Solomon wouldn't have known. And maybe Adonijah lives. But just to kind of end of chapter 2 is really him executing all those things that King David essentially asked him to do. Right? So Abiathar, the priest that kind of turned on him, Joab, Shimei's, like all of those kind of things play out here in chapter 2. Yeah, what do you think was interesting in the way that he kind of takes those marching orders from his father David and kind of fulfills those things?
Yeah, I mean, Joab's old now. Joab is old now. So, like, yeah, at one point he was top dog, but, like, he's old. And he can't do nothing but beg for mercy. And your boy Benaiah, my God, he goes in there and handles the business. But that's the thing is, like, I feel like Benaiah becomes the new Joab in terms of, like, handling the business. Like, he sends Benaiah to do this, he sends Benaiah to do that. And so, yeah, I think that was interesting. But yeah, I do appreciate though that Solomon, he did what his father said to do. He didn't say like, oh no, he might be cool.
Yeah.
No, he was like, okay, and it shall be done.
Yeah. And he does it shortly, like thereafter, right? He doesn't really waste much time to go and handle those things. Yeah. And so I think it's interesting, you know, not to get too far ahead, but it's very different of how even Solomon's sons kind of do that. Like, they try to just do the opposite of what Solomon did, and that ultimately gets them in trouble. But yeah, like, I do love that he just kind of went and said, "Yep, I'm gonna take your advice, Dad," and go about it that way. Okay, well, chapter 3 is probably a passage when it comes to King Solomon that, you know, there's some of these again that are just a little more known than others, right? In chapter 3 is kind of one of those, particularly the first half, where Solomon, or God appears to Solomon in a dream, kind of gives him a choice of anything you want. Like, what can I do for you and offer you? And he requests discernment to judge his people accordingly. The people of God, right? And wisdom. And God is impressed by that. He loves that about him. And so he gives him that, makes him wiser than anyone else, but also chooses to give him kind of riches and wealth and notoriety in some other ways. But yeah, what do you think was interesting here in chapter 3?
Yeah, I do, because I would wonder if I didn't have Solomon's example, what would I have asked for, you know? But it does challenge me that, like, in my praying, that I am praying for wisdom, like Solomon, right? That, like, that is to see that how much that it pleased the Lord, right? That, like, okay, Lord, I'm praying for wisdom to raise these children, or that you've called me to raise them, like, or to help disciple the next person that you bring to me, right? And so I love that they kind of gives us an insight to, you know, I love to see the things that please God, you know, so we get another thing here. But also I love that, like, shortly thereafter he gets to use this wisdom with these, like, debacle of the 2 prostitutes and stuff, that, you know, one claims, you know, the baby's dead and that's your baby that died, and she's like, no, your baby died and that's my baby. And but then I love at the end of it that, like, they could tell that the wisdom of the Lord, you know, that was upon him, right? That, like, that, I love it says, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. And so I just love it that, like, you can do something and somebody can say, oh, that's from the Lord. Like, he must have the Lord with him. Like, I remember we were talking about this when we were doing Joseph, right? And we were like, the Lord blessed him and everything that he did, and like he prospered and everything he did, that they could tell that the Lord was blessing him. And so it's like, yeah, just to have this lifestyle, to do these things that point back to the Lord.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, wow, like, I want that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. Like, I think, you know, if I'm candid, if I'm a king, like, there's probably a bunch of other things that I would think to ask for. Maybe not a bunch, but there's a few, right? Like, maybe I'd ask for peace, you know, from my enemies, right? Maybe I'd ask for, like, long life and years to rule. You know, those are kind of things that I would think that I would maybe feel were still somewhat, quote unquote, honorable. Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't about riches and wealth, but it's more like, yeah, like, I want us to be at peace. I don't want us to be killing people, right? And think that kind of stuff. But I don't know that any of those things would have impressed God the same way. It's just like, Lord, I just want to do what you want me to do. Like, I just want to know how you would want me to lead and what you would want me to do. And I feel like that's what he came out of it with. And as you said, yeah, it's his wisdom was so great that not only did the people recognize that it was, but like it spread, you know, his fame spread across the nations, really, right? And how wise he was. And you know, and we read that a little bit. Yeah, it's just he was so wise that like they would even call a roll eventually of like all the people he was wiser than, right?
Yeah,
which I just thought was so interesting that like they were like, yeah, all them cats you thought was wise, like they had nothing on Solomon specifically. So, yeah, that's, you know, you touched on that story there at the end of 3, and I think it's definitely a big deal. That's a hard choice, especially again at a time where there aren't paternity tests and all that stuff. Or maternity tests, you can't just do DNA testing and figure out who the baby belonged to. And so to be able to come up with a solution like that, I thought was really good. But yeah, then we kind of talk about kind of Solomon's reach in chapter 4. So some of his fame, some of his reach as far as his officials and things of that nature. Anything you thought was interesting here in chapter 4?
I love the structure, like just knowing that the Bible is also a history book, right? Like just to see like these people in their place, their roles, their responsibilities, because at the end of the day, this was a kingdom, right? Like then it had to run and it had to be efficient, and so even it's like down to like, you know, who's bringing provisions, right? Like, yeah, I think like I don't think I realized how much a king needed to eat, like a king's household needed to eat, right? Yeah. Like to see how like they provide, and it makes sense once you do find out later on that like he has 700 wives and 300 concubines, not including their children. And so I'm just like, whew, your household's big, Solomon. Like, of course, we need I got a little calendar on my refrigerator what we're going to eat for the week or for the... Yeah, you need some structure. And so, yeah, it is cool to see that, though.
Yeah. I think like it was one of those things where I just kind of wish I understood a little bit more of some of the measurements to just understand like again how much food we're talking to feed this household on a regular basis. But yes, I know it's all meant to just talk about how large his family and his like rule and his reign and those things were, right? Because, you know, it's interesting to my point about some of the stuff that I would have asked for instead, like that piece on all the food speaks to his wealth, right? And his prosperity. But he does still get peace, right? Like, you know, I read in 25, where it's like throughout Solomon's reign, Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan to Beersheba, each person under his own vine and his own fig tree. That like, I mean, essentially they had peace for the time that he reigned, right? They didn't have a lot of that. And so he still gets peace. He still gets prosperity.
Yeah.
In addition to the fact that he also has wisdom. And this is where we kind of get that list of like, he's wiser than Ethan, the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Calcul. Like, these are all the people that y'all thought was wise. He was greater than all of them.
Exactly.
Specifically. And then they go through additional things. He got animals. He could speak on proverbs and speak on, wisdom about animals, reptiles, and, all these other things as well. And I don't know, it was meant to just describe how great Solomon and his rule really was, and his reach was. He just wasn't just a wise man, but he was a great king by any earthly measure.
Yeah, for sure he was. And we see the trickle-down effect, because even in verse 20 of chapter 4 here, it says, Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. And I love that. As I said, like, he was a great king, but that also meant that he had a great kingdom, and this reach that he had, like this wealth and this wisdom, it did trickle down to like everyone benefiting, which just once again models great leadership, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's good. Well, we will hear a little bit more about Solomon's kingdom next week, how that plays out. Solomon gets to fulfill another one of King David's kind of dreams or visions, right? Like we already said he kind of went through some of those actions that he asked him to do, but next week we'll get to see him kind of do something else that David wanted to do but couldn't do, and hear a little bit more about that. And then ultimately we get into a bunch of other kings over these next 2 books. So it'll be really interesting to see the other kings of Judah and Israel as we explore that in the rest of First Kings next week. But appreciate you guys joining us this week. Hope, again, that this was helpful to go along with your reading, additional context, just our own insights, thoughts, perspective. If you have your own, please share them with us. And we have a chat in our app, the VIBEZ Church app. You can also comment on YouTube or wherever else you may be watching this. We try to keep up with those where we can, and or just reach out to us, DM us something, find a way to let us know what you're getting and observing and gleaning, because we would love to hear those things as well. But see you next week. But until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.